Hey everyone, welcome back to Psych with Dr. DK. I am Dr. DK. I am glad to be back with you. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about foster care and what it is, why it is, and how does it happen. So we're going to do the what, how, why, when. So some things to know. The reason we have been taking a large break is because over the course of the month of May, I've been running around California being able to speak at foster care events for families, foster care students who are in college, for staff, faculty, and stakeholders at the colleges and counties of California to talk about, what it is like to be a foster care kid navigating the educational system, and to also train foster care staff, faculty, and parents on just some things to know so that they're more aware of what can happen emotionally, mentally, and physically with a foster youth student. One of the things that comes across when these conversations happen is the question of, well, for those who don't know, is why? Why does foster care happen? Or when does foster care happen? And I think it's a very important topic that we need to talk about because this is the kind of a reason why not a lot of people are aware of how to help. So when a child is placed in foster care, it is always because of neglect and abuse. Now, foster care does not happen to a student or a child if they're self-harming or if the child is abusing the family. If the child is abusive toward the family or self-harming, they're put in an institution for mental health. They're trying to improve their mental health. And this is not to say that that has never happened. Sometimes it is revealed that the foster care kid was put in foster care because of the parents being abusive, and that's why the child was acting out the way that they were, or they were self-harming because they were being abused. So when a child is put into foster care, it is never because of the child. It is always because of the parent. So what happens is foster care, I think there's some misconceptions and misunderstandings, and I've had a lot of conversations on this, is, I don't understand why a foster care kid is put in the system and then reunified at home and then put back in the system. So we're going to kind of talk through that a little bit. It's kind of a lot to untangle. But really why kids are put into foster care is because the parent is neglectful, long-term neglect, and abusive. So when a child is taken from the home, it is never almost always immediately. Sometimes the cases of when it is immediate and that kid is taken out immediately is when there is severe neglect and abuse and the parent is not safe for the child to be around, or the environment they're in is not safe. When that happens, it's usually like there is an excessive amount of drugs and alcohol that are being consumed by the parent, and the parent is putting this child in danger. For example, getting into a car with the child, not caring that they're buckled in, and speeding down the freeway. Another thing is they're abusing the child physically, like severe abuse, not discipline. Now, I'm going to kind of go over that a little bit because I think, again, there's some confusion between what real discipline is and abuse and when that crosses over. But the other things that could happen is maybe the child is literally walking around the neighborhood at 2 or 3 years old with no parent. This has happened, and this is when children get taken away because it's like, where's your parent? I don't know. I haven't seen them in 3 days. Sometimes when a death occurs where it was something like the children were being neglected and left, and one child dies and the other 2 or 3 or 1 are by themselves in apartments or houses and nobody knew that child was there. So there's this really, it's very clear that the parents are no longer fit to take these children and protect them. That's why this has happened, is that. The other thing is neglect is when there's no food in the house for long periods of time. The children are dirty. Their clothes are always dirty. They're always like they're in school. They're just like, I'm not eating. Maybe they're always hungry. There's some signs that teachers have to pay attention to that say like, this kid is possibly being neglected. I am seeing bruises, or I'm not seeing bruises, but this child is scarfing down food when we feed them and then saying they're always hungry and they don't come in with lunch and there's no lunch thing for them to take advantage of at the school, and the parent is MIA most of the time and will not speak with us. So now again, some people are like, well, my kid's always hungry. like, and we face that at the school. I understand it's frustrating, but there are students that are in your student's classroom who are being neglected. And this is where teachers are just protecting the innocent and making sure things that are not supposed to happen are not happening. So a little bit about when they're put into foster care is when CPS can come in. Sometimes they take a while. Sometimes it's in a 1 or 2 report situations when they see extreme abuse, such as children will immediately be taken from their home when that child has been hospitalized for broken bones, baby shaking syndrome, and other things. So, and or sexual abuse when it's severe. If a child is said that someone is molesting them, sometimes that takes time. If the person that is molesting them is in the home, typically what they do is they'll say that individual needs to go and cannot be around these children. But then if the parent continues to let the predator around the child, then some actions may be taken for that child to be taken into foster homes. So the question always comes up is, well, what do you consider excessive drinking? Or what do you consider as abuse versus discipline? So excessive drinking, they're not going to sit there. CPS doesn't look at how much you're drinking as a parent. They are really not going to pry into anything until they see that this is affecting the child. So again, getting into a car after heavily drinking and not driving safely, that's putting the child in danger. Or allowing that alcohol to be so excessive or drugs to be excessive that it's now affecting the child because you're physically assaulting the child and beating the child up. That is when, it's not 1 or 2 drinks. So I know some people, they get so afraid that CPS is going to come into their life. And I'm like, it kind of makes me squint a little bit because I'm just like, if you're not abusing your child, you shouldn't worry. If your child is fed and you're not neglecting your child, no one's going to care how much alcohol you drink. Now, your doctor might, because you might be drinking too much that it's hurting your liver and your kidneys, but CPS is not going to come in because you had 1 or 2 drinks or however many drinks that you have until it affects the child. You're no longer taking the child to school. You're no longer making sure they get to school safely or home safely. You're not home when they're home all the time. They're not eating. They're running in the streets. Those are things of neglect. So it kind of goes into the next question that a lot of people will ask is, well, what's the difference between me spanking my child and being accused of beating them up? Okay, guys, come on. That's kind of a silly question, but I get it because this is a reality, is that some people will say, like, I just spanked him. And what they mean is, I took my 2-year-old and I spanked him with a belt 7 times because he didn't listen to me when I counted to 3. That's excessive. That's excessive discipline, especially with an object. Now, there are rules for disciplining. You can put your kid on a timeout. You can take things away. Like, you can discipline your child in a safe manner. If they're trying to touch the fire and you smack their hand, that's not abuse. When you take a book or a spatula to the back of their head multiple times because they moved a way you didn't like them to, that's abuse. I'm just going to call it out. Like, you don't take an object and hit your kid. Like, if you're going to spank your child, it's with your palm of your hand or the fingertips of your hand 1 or 2 times, and it's not going to be super hard. It's just to get their attention to be like, hey, stop. And most parents who parent very well, they'll say spanking is the last resort, and it's for really bad things. Like, they punched their brother or a friend, and they won't stop. And you put them on a timeout, that doesn't stop. So then you smack them and then, spank them on the butt, and then you put them in their room. Like, there's levels of what you do. And when you're in an abusive situation as a child with a parent, there is no levels. It is all excessive. It is, I'm going to hit you until I feel this feeling out of my body. And so what happens, and this is the sad reality, is that it's not one smack on the butt. It is a rod, a hanger, a shoe, a belt, a book, whatever they can grab in their hand over and over and over and over and over again until that person inside their emotion feels like, okay, I'm done disciplining them. This is a very dangerous way to think about how to discipline your child. And if you're like, well, I hit my kid until they're blue, you need to rethink your discipline. And I'm sorry, I hate to say that, but I'm going to be the bearer of bad news. Like, that's abuse. There have been situations where parents will say, you know what, and this is disgusting, but they rationalize sexual abuse. Well, my child wanted me to do it. And that's a very gross thing. And this is where I have a hard time in any situation where they're like, well, it's totally fine that I touch my child that way. It's totally, there's just, that could go off on the tangent. But it's, sexual abuse is always wrong. Always. Doesn't matter if it was once, doesn't matter. At one time is bad. And I think that there's this notion that, well, this is stuff I have heard from people firsthand, is, well, he didn't have sex with you. It's like, no, but he touched my body and groped my body. That's sexual abuse. And boys and girls can be sexually abused. And I think there is a stigma that it's only girls and the sexual predator is only male. That's false. Men and women both can sexually abuse somebody. And even to the point of that child being pregnant or getting someone else pregnant. That's very rare when that happens when they're young. But it has happened. You know, there has been cases where it's a teacher who has persuaded a teenager to have sex with them. And it's just disgusting. So when sexual abuse happens in the family, the person who's sexually abusing is asked to leave the home. Now, again, when that doesn't happen, usually more visits happen and they try to, determine what should happen with the children to keep them safe. Sexual abuse is horrible. The hardest one to prove, though, is emotional abuse. Now, emotional abuse, again, some people get on to me about this when I share about what I went through with my parents, is they're like, well, parents are just going to say things, they don't mean it. When your parent decides to tear you down to make them feel superior, it's abuse. There is a difference between being like, I don't like that you're doing that, or like, oh my God, I hate you, and like, stop doing that. Like, where it's instant and you're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm never going to say that again. I'm going to try my heart. Like, oh, I can't believe those words slipped out of my mouth. Those are accidents. But to purposefully say, nobody loves you, everybody hates you, you are the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And to do this over and over and over again, to feel that you're, first off, like, look how I have this over you. But secondly, to be like, words are really going to hurt you. We know that children are different. Every child's different. Some children, it's like, you could say, I'm disappointed in you, and it's like, ugh, that hurts them so bad. But then when, you say that to another child, they're like, I'm really disappointed. They're like, whatever. It's different. And if you know as an abuser that words hurt your child, you use that to your advantage. And it's really hard to prove like things because it's he said, she said at that point. But I remember my own parent telling me they wish that I was dead. They wish that they could kill me, that they think about it, that I was the worst thing to happen. As soon as I was born, their life was ruined. They thought about killing me multiple times, like abortions and things like that. And like, I wished that God would make you stop breathing at night. Those are not things you tell your child. And so when people are like, parents make mistakes, I'm like, not like that. Not like that. I'm sorry, no, because that's abuse. And that's where talking with families on things that we could do better, on it. It really doesn't come from a, hey, you're doing the wrong things. It's more of just like, hey, these are things that I did experience as a foster care kid. I don't go into the details like that and the nitty gritty. I just say, we have to realize that foster care kids are emotionally damaged, physically damaged when they're abused, and spiritually even crushed. And so we have to breathe this life back into them to say, look, first off, I'm sorry that this happened to you. Secondly, I'm not going to be that person who tolerates that on your behalf. But here's how I'm going to do life with you and fight for you. So when foster care happens again, it's not because the child did anything. It's because the parents did a lot of bad things. And from my own experience, and I've talked to a few other foster care kids that I know, is that usually it took a while for CPS to say, okay, this house is no longer deemed necessary to, or this parent is not deemed necessary. They're not the best parent. They're not going to change. This is dangerous for the kids to be here. Before they take the kid away. And it takes report after report after report. Sometimes it takes longer. When it's harder to prove, it takes a really long time. And the hard part is when you're physically and sexually abused, when CPS has to check you, you're literally naked. And they have to take pictures and examine you, and it is so humiliating that it's like, why am I going to do this every single time? Why am I going to literally expose my heart and my body to a stranger and then have them walk away and do nothing? And I experienced that, and it is really heartbreaking to hear that other children out there are being told that they're liars because their parents are good at manipulating and changing the narrative to what fits for them. And there is this exposure that happens that when you're put into foster care, it's your fault. And your life is exposed to the world. Everyone knows. And when you think here's the reality is that someone's just like, this kid is in foster care, this is our foster care kid, you literally think that every detail of your story is being told. And that everyone is just, oh yeah, she was this and this is this, here's that picture, and that's how you feel. You become a case versus a person. And so you lose yourself, and you lose your self-esteem, and you lose your credibility because people call you liars. And family members and I've again talked to so many others who experience this, family members will call them liars and say, you just need to listen, and if you just did better, you wouldn't have to deal with your dad or mom hitting you or abusing you or whatever. And it's like, as a child, you believe them. And as an adult on the other side, I'm like, oh my God, you were lying. And you literally were the person who could have saved me from so much more and my siblings. And you chose not to. Why? Because you liked them. You liked my parent. And that's just a very real reality, is that sometimes people just don't see the child. Now, a big question I also get asked is reunification. I know reunification can work in some instances and it does not in others, as well as CPS knows. But they have to show the court they're doing everything on behalf of the child for the child's well-being. However, the child isn't the one being able to prove that. The parent has to. So reunification, if you don't know what it is where once the child has been taken out into a foster home, they try to place the child back once the parent has done the to-do list of what they need to do to basically get their child back in the home. If that child ends up back in the home and then the parent fails again or is abusive again, the child is then taken back into foster homes. And it's not the same one. It's usually a different foster home. The hard reality is that these children are just looking for someone to love them. I was a kid who just wanted love. And so when you are written off by your parents and then CPS bounces you around a little bit, or a lot, some kids are bounced around at least 8 times. Some have said I was bounced around 24 times. And I talked to a family in the month of May at an event. They said their 18-month-old had been, I think she said, over 18 homes. 18-month-old, I think it was 18 or 20 times since the baby was born, had been bounced around, and they were looking to adopt this child. It's heartbreaking. It's hard to hear, and it's heartbreaking because you hear these stories of these children consistently being torn from their home, never having the same house twice. And really what happens again is it's just nobody wants me. Nobody cares enough to just keep me here. And as a child, you don't understand the reunification. You're just like, okay, mommy did what she needed to do, or daddy did what they needed to do. And now we're back to square one where I'm being hit or abused. And there's a fear. And honestly, if you talk to some foster care kids, they'll tell you, they're like, I should have never been put back. But because my parent did the to-do list that they were told to do by the court, they were allowed to have me back, and it was horrible. Maybe it was good for a period of time, but then the parent started drinking again and got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and that they started abusing, and it's just this whole gross mess. And reunification again can work for some, but it doesn't work for everybody. And I think that that's the hard part, is that it's based off of a to-do list that someone could check off and go do, and it's not really based off the situation. Like, okay, this parent is taking 7 months to start even doing this process. They've done this process in 4 years versus what could have been done in 6 months or a year. And it's hard because, again, the CPS workers know it. And there's nothing that they can do. It's not them. It's literally the system. And honestly, it's like even the courts, they can't really do anything. They have to legally show they're letting the parent try. And they're giving them opportunity after opportunity. And let me tell you, like, going back and forth between abuse is the most degrading thing in the world. Because what, again, it says is, for a period of time, I will be a great parent. And then once they stop looking, I'm going to beat the shit out of you and hurt you or start sexually abusing you again. And you realize that that parent is not the parent you need. So foster care, again, it does not happen because a child did something wrong. It always happens because the parent did something very bad. And unfortunately, it takes a really long time sometimes to get those kids out of that environment. The foster care system is overwhelmed. There's over 400,000 foster care kids in the United States today. And so how do we help? There are so many programs we can be a part of. We need more foster houses. We need more good parents. Connect with your local church, connect with your county, see how you guys can help. I know, here's the reality, is being a foster care parent exposes every aspect of your life. Your finances, your relationship, your marriage, your friendships, your community, it exposes everything. But it is so worth it to look at one child and say, you're worth it. Teenagers are least likely to be placed. They are afraid of foster homes and usually go to a group home. And I was talking to one young man who said, I didn't know what the difference was between a foster home and a group home. But what I did know once I got there was a group home didn't care for me. Like, I was just doing my own thing. And then by the time I was able to get into a foster home, I was given all these rules. So if you are fostering teenagers, realize they're usually raising themselves at a very, very young age. They're usually raising their siblings, and so they don't get placed with their siblings. And nobody really wants to foster a teenager. They will usually go toward younger children. And I get it, I understand. But there is so much love that needs to be given toward every child. And every community can help. There are county programs that you can help fund. There are college programs that you can help fund. But there's just a really big need to help foster care kids. And I said this, it didn't land well with a few people, but I said, in America, our orphans are our foster care kids. And what I mean by that is, yes, their parents are around, but their parents are not mentally around. And they need community to be able to survive. So, yes, they are our orphans of America. And it is very hard to see and hear these stories. Even as a foster care kid myself, it breaks my heart when I have shared my story, just little pieces of my story, and like, this is what I experienced, this is what I've gone through, and I'm not going to go in the details, but you know why I was in foster homes. That's all I have to say for them to get it. And every student has said, I finally hear someone I can relate to. And my hope is to continue to share my story on a larger scale, to get into more of these rooms, because what tends to happen is that, you know, a lot of schools or organizations will bring these really great people in who are politicians or people who are very disconnected to what foster care is. And I think that that's why this conversation is so important. But they'll come in and be like, oh, you know, when you go to education, your parents will help you. And these kids are sitting there like, my parent told me to go die, like literally. And I remember that feeling of just like, you know, people are like, oh, studying was so hard. And it was like living in my car was really hard too. And so being able to say that to these students, they're like, oh my God, you get me. You understand me. You really, like, not even a little bit, like, you get me. Like, yes, our stories are a little different. Maybe they were in more homes than I was, or whatever, or they were in their abuse longer. But every single one of them are just like, I finally have someone standing in front of me who really, really gets it. And I think that's such a powerful thing. So I'm going to continue sharing my story. Next episode, I'm actually going to share my story with you guys. Just to share it. I think it's super important. I'm not going to go into the details, but it's very important for people to understand how bad foster care, it's not even foster care, just being abused is, how bad being abused is. And foster care can be that saving grace, but why we push back at it. So I want you guys to join me next week. I'm sorry if this was depressing. Actually, I'm not sorry. I want you guys to understand, and to understand sometimes we have to go through the ugly to be able to understand, so we can help and become the beauty from those ashes for these people. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. And I hope you enjoyed today's or episode. Not a session. I'm not a counselor, but just I hope you guys have learned something from today. If you have any questions, please reach out. I am always here to answer those questions, and I will see you all next week.